Hey fellow woodturners, welcome back to my shop. Today I want to talk a little bit about vacuum chucking, and before we get started let me give you a dramatic illustration to see if it's something you might be interested in making or buying. First thing we're going to do is change the view so you can see what I'm going to be doing. Okay, I have a vacuum chuck mounted to my Powermatic. I've got a shop-made chuck of PVC and wood and MDF 4 inches square. Let me show you how this thing works. Okay, that's a little hokey demonstration, turning a stool, but it does illustrate the power of this vacuum chuck. Now, with this 4-inch chuck, at 10 pounds of mercury, had a holding pressure of 61 pounds. I actually cranked up the pressure to 20 pounds of mercury and wound up with a force holding that against my chuck of about 123 pounds. So that's a lot of force. Now the way a vacuum chuck, well, first let me start off with a disclaimer. Everything I know about vacuum chucks and using a vacuum chuck and vacuum pumps, I got off the internet or through personal experience. So if it doesn't feel right to you, don't do it. So how does it work? Basically you have a pump, and I'll show you mine in just a moment, that pulls pressure. And by removing pressure behind the workpiece or between the pump, the spindle, lathe spindle, and your work, by reducing that pressure, you have the atmospheric pressure pressing down. Now, vacuum chucks commonly measure pressure in terms of inches of mercury, and the maximum theoretical number of inches of mercury is roughly 30 inches. It's feasible on a vacuum chuck to get somewhere around 25 inches of mercury. I can give you the formula, but just to illustrate with that stool, at a low setting I can get 61 pounds of pressure. A little higher setting I can get 123 pounds. I can crank it up and get even more. You can actually take thin forms with a larger chuck, a thin turned bowl, for example, and crush it with a vacuum chuck if you're not careful. So it is that powerful. Why would you want to have one? Well, they're faster than jam chucks. They're easier to use and faster to use than cold jaws or a Longworth jaw. Certainly easier. They're no more difficult to put together than making a donut chuck, and they'll work with different types of turning projects. And hey, it's a toy, and you know, for a lot of us guys, that's what it's all about. You can have one, so why don't you have one? There's 3 different types of vacuum systems. There's one that's called a Venturi system, and it uses an adapter and your air easy for you to say, air compressor. And using a Venturi adapter, it converts the air pressure to a vacuum sucking device, and you can buy those at Whole. A common one is Holdfast. You can get it from Craft Supply and other vendors, and that's a suitable system for some folks if you got a convenient air compressor where you don't have the noise of that recycling in the background. I have a small one. A pancake one will run that system. I just find it very distracting, and this was a better fit for me. A second option, which I don't think is a good option, but it can be done, is using a shop vac, and you make one, but it has a tendency to burn out the motors from what I understand, and it doesn't generate as much holding power as these other devices. But the one I use uses a commonly available air compressor, or rather vacuum pump, gassed model 523 that I bought off the internet, and it's the same model that Craft Supply and other vendors sell for this purpose. components. Let's walk through some of the components. I got my inspiration to make a vacuum chuck from an excellent article by Steve Schlump, who posted it on sawmillcreek.org, one of my favorite woodturning forums. You can access, or I have the link to his article, contained in an article that I wrote on my system that has more details on this, and you can download that document from my my website. It's posted in the description of this YouTube video. And within there's some of the detail on parts numbers and that sort of thing that you'll find helpful. There's, as I mentioned, I was able to get this pump. This is a gas 523 vacuum pump from the internet for less than $100 used, including shipping. They are fairly expensive sometimes, so you have to shop around. Now, there's different types of vacuum pumps. Like I said, my disclaimer, I'm not an expert on vacuum pumps, but there's rotary vane, which is this one. There's diaphragm, rocking piston. There's refrigerant pumps. The key is it's got to be able to pull, I'd say, a minimum of 2.5 cubic feet per minute. This one will pull 4.5 cubic feet per minute, which is a really good suction. Anything between 2.5 and 4.5, I would say, is good. And this rules out the little small pumps you'd get from Harbor Freight. There's an older version of this pump that's available, a 522 model that pulls 4 cubic feet per minute. If you can find that one, they used to be readily available at a surplus site in a 220 model, but they ran out of those eventually. I would get a 110 model if you can, because it's just a lot more convenient. They don't pull a lot of power. They have small motors on them, but it'll make your electrical a lot simpler. Also, some of air pumps or vacuum pumps use oil, and they'll spit out an oil spray that can contaminate your shop. So I would avoid the ones that use oil as a lubricant in it, and get an oilless model. It also needs filters. In this case, this one has a built-in filter, and you can just take these off and clean them easily. And I posted here when the last time I cleaned it. You can just blow it out. You can also get an additional external filter, and for ones that don't have internal filters, and as I understand it, very few of them do, you can put a filter right here on the intake. This is the intake port. This is the out exit port. As I said, there are three components to a vacuum system. There's the pump. The second component is what I call the manifold system, or the control system. It consists of a pump, some of the plumbing, and a bleeder valve. And this is just a little simple fuel filter from Walmart. By turning this bleeder valve, you actually let air in to reduce the pressure. So you want a way of keeping the contaminant from inside your shop, any dust in the air, from going into your system and through your pump. This is a cold water shutoff valve from a toilet, and it works well. There are lots of other valve systems available. The third part of this system is the rotary adapter, and let's talk about those a little bit. Here's an example of a rotary adapter I bought from JT Toolworks. I've got a reference to his site in that document I mentioned earlier. And it's got two bearings in it, and it spins freely. And basically, because these O-rings, it will just slide into your spindle on this model lathe, and basically it keeps you from getting your hose from getting wrapped around the axle, because as your spindle turns, you've got to have this rotary adapter mechanism to keep the hose pipe from turning. Here's how this rotary adapter actually fits in my headstock, and it just slides in, and those O-rings hold it perfectly tight. Now you can make those, and the basic components are a bearing. There's lots of different bearings, a brass barb from an air compressor, and some of these look like they're brass, but they're actually metal. This one, for example, is steel. You can tell from the magnet, so this would not be suitable. But if you have brass, you can actually put this in your lathe. You turn this barb down to fit your pressure fit into your bearing, and then you turn you an adapter out of wood or corian or aluminum, or you can buy one commercially. Here's one. Let me reference Doc Green has an excellent book on fixtures and chucks for wood turning. He's got a whole article, or a couple articles, or a couple of chapters in here devoted to vacuum chucks, and he gives you the part numbers for this particular bearing, and he also gives you some designs on the adapters. This is one I made out of wood, along with one of those bearings and barbs, and it fits on my mini lathe. This bearing that he cited comes from the let me find the model number, 6201-2RS model of bearings. The RS stands for shielded. There's three kinds of bearings. There's open bearings, which you wouldn't want. There's shielded bearings, which look very similar to this, and then there's sealed bearings, and this seals the lubricant in there permanently. You want to make sure you get a double sealed bearing, because a shielded bearing that might look the same will actually allow the pump to suck out the lubricant or the grease out of your bearing, so that wouldn't hold up very well at all. These are very inexpensive. I found one on Amazon for about $4, shipping included. Then later I was buying some bearings from my 18-inch Rikon bandsaw and discovered they're the same bearings. And I got a package, believe it or not, of 10 of these bearings for only $16, shipping included, from Amazon. So they're not very expensive to get. And of course, again, you can buy these rotary adapters that are made or partially made. There's a source to there's a reference to a source that will actually turn this for you and mount it here and sell you the supplies for a manifold much cheaper than you can buy them commercially. Okay, the third component we want to talk about is the actual chucks, and they're easily fabricated. You can buy very nice aluminum ones. One Way sells a couple of them. One of them's $100, one's a little bit less. JT Toolworks has a very nice one that uses actually PVC couplers, and you can remove and add different size couplers for different sizes. They're easy to thread with a Beal tap to go ahead and make the threaded adapter. I know some people like to use face plates, but it's far more expensive, and this is a really good, effective solution that is low cost and seals air very well. So if you don't have a Beal tap, I had a video earlier on using a Beal tap for making these threaded blocks. It's just another example of how handy they are. Now, between the actual chuck and the wood, it's nice to have some type of foam. This is actually a piece of mailing foam. You want to use closed cell foam where the air does not go through it. And you know, these mailers work well. Another low-cost solution is what they call fun foam that you can get from Walmart or Michael's or Hobby Lobby. It's a 1/16 inch closed cell foam. Comes in different colors. I tend to like white. These were available for less than $1 each. The smaller one actually has an adhesive back where you can peel it and stick it, but you can use spray-on adhesive, or in some instances I use some leftover a thick foam that I got off and repurposed off an old treadmill, and I just set it on the chuck sometimes. A very handy chuck I frequently use is this large flat one, because you can just put a bowl, if the rim is true, you can just put a bowl on it of almost any size, and that will hold it very well. So I have different size chucks for different size bowls, and the 4-inch I showed you is my largest, and that holds very well. But you can actually make larger ones if you do larger projects. Okay, let me show you this in actual action, practical application. You want to keep your reference to the center on your turning till the very end. In this case, this is what we're using this for, is to turn this off. So I've got it mounted, I've got my pump ready to go. Turn it on. I'm going to turn the pressure down a little bit. Turn the pressure down a little bit, it's a little high. It's on about 15 pounds per inch, so I think I'm getting somewhere halfway between 60 and 120 pounds. Put on my face shield. And that's running fairly true for me to deal with the bottom. I'm using a tailstock support just as long as possible for safety, and I'm going to keep this at a reasonable speed, maybe south of 800 RPM. Okay, I know I haven't given you all the information you need about vacuum chucks, but there's a lot of information out there on the internet, but I hope I've given you enough information for you to determine whether this is something that you want to pursue or not for you. If you have any questions, feel free to post them to this video. If maybe there's some room for discussion here. If anybody's got any questions or comments. Thanks for watching.